advisors about joining the attack on Iran. Will we get an answer to that? If you do, we do. We'll get it at the same time on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
It's 6 o'clock. I'm John Pienaar. Welcome to Pienaar and Friends. Tonight, that is Adam Boulton and Anna Mikhailova, our political editor. Now, we've got a lot to talk about, and you can see it all, you can listen to it all, you can see it all on YouTube if you want to join us that way, and we can all listen together, talk together, chat after the news with Eliza Phillips.
Thank you, John. Good evening. Britain is urging the US not to join Israel in its strikes on Iran. It's understood President Trump told senior aides late on Tuesday that he was approving a plan to attack Iran. Today, he's denied those reports. Tehran and Israel are exchanging rocket fire and have been for weeks now over Iran's nuclear capabilities. Times Radio asked Emily Thornberry, the chair of the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee, whether she'd support UK involvement.
I think that we shouldn't get involved. I don't think that we are under threat ourselves. And I think the argument that one of our allies is under threat and needs our active support is a weak one.
A PhD student who drugged and raped 10 women in London and China has been jailed for life. Zhenhao Zhou kept a trophy box of women's belongings and filmed 9 of the rapes. Detectives reckon he could have targeted dozens of women, with 20 already coming forward since his conviction. Sarah Pike is from the Crown Prosecution Service.
His life sentence reflects the heinous act and harm he caused to the women and the danger he poses to society. We have always been determined to seek justice for both the unidentified and identified victims in this case.
Hospital consultants have threatened to join resident doctors on picket lines this year. The British Medical Association says it's after indicative ballot. The union warned the government risked having several groups of doctors on picket lines together later this year unless the Health Secretary agreed to provide a bigger pay increase. The Prime Minister has exclusively told Talk he's committed to tackling grooming gangs. Sir Keir Starmer says he's working closely with police to do it.
The instruction is absolutely clear to go after these vile criminals. The most important thing is there's a criminal investigation where there can be, and that where perpetrators are convicted, they then go to prison.
Campaigners who want terminally ill people to be able to end their lives are making a final plea ahead of a vote tomorrow. MPs will debate and vote on the assisted dying bill, with the result too close to call. The Bank of England has decided to keep UK interest rates at 4.25%. Speaking at the Times CEO Summit, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves said the bank's job is to help keep inflation in check.
We respect independent economic institutions, and the bank has got an incredibly important but difficult job to do, and we want them to set the monetary policy that is appropriate for meeting the inflation target, because we also saw in the last Parliament a double-digit inflation, which was so challenging for businesses.
And the UK has recorded its hottest day of the year, with the temperature reaching 32.2 degrees Celsius in Kew in West London. An amber heat alert has been issued for all of England, lasting until early Monday. And for a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on any podcast platform.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and via your smart speaker.
Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio with Barclays Business Banking.
It's really good to have you with us on Pienaar and Friends, an hour of good conversation in very good company, which tonight is Adam Boulton, my colleague here at Times Radio. Hello to you, Adam. Good to see you.
Hello, how are you?
Good, I'm well. And Anna Mikhailova's here, our political editor at Times Radio. Hi to you, Anna.
Soon to be. Hello, John.
Soon to be. We can't wait. We really, really cannot wait. And really welcome to you for listening. And if you're viewing, if you're watching on our YouTube Times Radio channel, well, you're very welcome to. We're going to be streaming there for the next hour or so. Anna, can I come to you first for your thought for the day?
Well, my thought for the day, I guess, relates to tomorrow, which is the assisted dying amendment assisted dying vote will come to the House finally for third reading, and it is a momentous moment when MPs could choose to either wade through this legislation, this once in a lifetime legislation, or or vote against it, which would set it back for probably decades. So it's a really, I mean, I've been speaking to both sides on the debate in the House today, and it looks very close. They're really scrambling for every vote. Some on the anti-camp are even trying to organise private ambulances for an MP who's stuck at home with COVID, because they're saying every single vote counts. And I would say, I mean, most people have their view on this already, and most people's views don't change on such things. But I think this is probably the moment, if you haven't yet expressed your view to your MP, this is probably the moment to write in, if you feel strongly about it, ahead of tomorrow, and say how you feel.
Just talking to this just a moment ago with Luke Trelm from More in Common. I mean, the public are broadly really quite strongly in favour of a right to assisted dying, and that's stayed pretty steady, the level of support throughout all of these debates in the House of Commons and conversations in the media on programmes like this one and many, many other places. There is a suggestion, Anna, isn't there, that the opinion at Westminster has somewhat shifted. Have you picked that up?
Well, I don't know. I think the group that are concerned both about the legislation in principle and also about how it's being delivered is more motivated, I would say, at this stage than the Kim Leadbeater group that is trying to get it through. So I think it's going to be a close vote. There are certainly people who are switching positions and who do not they think the legislation in the amendment stage has changed too much. They don't like how it looks right now, and they are frankly concerned about the unintended consequences. I mean, like you say, broadly, a lot of people, societal views have changed, and emotionally people do support it, and they do support people being able to make a decision themselves at the end of their lives. But it is the job of legislators to kind of discard that emotion and actually just look at what they are bringing to law, because we have seen too many times that a piece of legislation, if it's not drafted well, can really have damaging effects.
That's going to be a big story tomorrow. And just a reminder, we are waiting now for Karoline Leavitt, the President's press secretary, to come to the podium at the briefing room in the West Wing of the White House. I can see now on the newsfeed that it's at the moment empty podium. Plenty of journalists lined up in front of it, waiting to see what the press secretary has to say after the meeting between the President and his intelligence and security advisors. Iran, obviously the subject of that meeting. Will we get a decision from the President on whether or not America is willing to join the attack with Israel on Iran? CBS, the news network, reporting just in the last few moments that they understand the President has decided that the mountain base, the nuclear site of Fordo, will have to be destroyed if the nuclear ambitions of Iran are to be stopped. Now, does that mean we will then see America provided the bombers and the bombs to achieve that? It seems pretty clear that only America has that military capacity. Will we learn the answer to that question maybe in the next few moments when we're watching that podium, I promise you, with all of our eyes and most of our ears? When that moves, we will move and bring it to you immediately. We've also got, by the way, Harriet Alexander, our stateside colleague, on the line. Hello to you, Harriet.
Hi, John. Hello.
Hi. I'll see if we've got time to ask you your thought for the day in a moment, but I imagine your thoughts are very much focused on what's about to happen in the White House briefing room.
Yes, they are, very much so. I mean, we're all interested to see what Karoline Leavitt is going to say. I mean, I would be astonished if she came out and said what Trump has decided, because he has taken great pains, really, to keep everybody on their toes for the past week or so in terms of what his intentions are. Yes. He has said that he knows what he's going to do. He knows what his options are. But he wouldn't tell us what they are. So I think, if they do decide to launch this bunker busting bomb, we will hear about it when it's happened rather than in advance. But certainly that's what everybody wants to know. We all really want to know what's going to happen. And there's some really interesting debate going on here, John, even within MAGA, different factions of the Trump supporting group who are arguing either very strongly for or very strongly against getting involved.
Yes, so the president being pulled in very different directions. And it is clearly fair to say, isn't it? This is the toughest decision that Donald Trump certainly has been taken in his presidential term so far, maybe the toughest he will have to take. Anyway, we'll find out together, I guess in just a minute's time. The journalists in the briefing room looking down at their notepads, looking up at the podium. Every time they look up, there's nobody there. That will change at some point in the near future. Adam Boulton, of course, here with us. Meanwhile, while we wait, Adam, what's your thought for the day?
Well, my thought today has a Trump theme, and it relates to that incident of Keir Starmer picking up Donald Trump's papers when he dropped them on Tuesday. Now, that happened overnight. I think I would have done the same thing. It was entirely spontaneous, entirely polite. However, it comes in the context, of course, of all of this and concerns about how close the British government should be to Donald Trump, and it kind of acted out. And the reason why I raise it is because Kate asked me about it on Times Radio Breakfast on Tuesday morning, and she said, do you think it was a mistake to pick those papers up? And I said, I think it was probably spontaneous. That's the sort of man Keir Starmer is. But if he didn't want to look as though he's a sort of poodle of Donald Trump, a man he keeps calling Donald, perhaps he should have resisted his naturally polite instincts. Now, the reason why I mention this is since then I have had, and it is still going on, 48 hours of abuse online for even drawing attention to it. I'll just give you, I mean, massive, hundreds of insulting messages. Perhaps instead of an even more inane thing to say, we should celebrate having a decent human being as Prime Minister. Pathetic so-called journalism. You should be embarrassed. I'm embarrassed for you. Have you sunk to this level? You should be ashamed of yourself. Nothing to be proud of in a once respected journalist. Summary of everything that's wrong with lobby journalism. You are amazingly cheap, mind in the gutter, rock bottom, seek help, old washed up journalist. About he had his papers handed to him. The Westminster bubble is out of touch with people who routinely help each other with favours. Now, you know, we're all used to a bit of insults, but people are clearly annoyed about this, and I'm afraid I think they're annoyed about it because it resonates. Yeah. Because that image, quite inadvertently, quite, you know, Keir Starmer, as I say, doing the right thing, still acts out a feeling that maybe he's just a little bit too helpful to Donald Trump and has got too close to him.
Here's a sore point.
I agree with you. I mean, you've been the subject or the victim of a tsunami of ferocious courtesy. You've been overwhelmed by British politeness. What are you thinking about this, Anna?
I mean, listen, I also would have probably picked them up, but again, neither of us are Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Yeah. So
I sense a bit of dissent here. Am I sensing dissent? Because I do wonder. I obviously thought about this. Sorry, listeners. Whether it was the right thing to do. I agree that it was an instinctive thing to do. It's what a decent person would do. You just do that. Someone drops something, you help them pick it up. But it wasn't a great look, and maybe it would have looked better not to do that and just ignore it and just try to sort of ride it out.
I mean, I should say I did have one or two supporters, clearly a minority, saying embarrassing for his country, he looks subservient, fair comment, bad optics for the Prime Minister. Yeah. And this is this thing. I mean, you know, if I try to think of an equivalent thing, it was that famous thing, which I was certainly there, you were probably there, of Neil Kinnock stumbling in the foam on Brighton Beach, and kind of it set a tone.
Yeah, but that certainly wasn't his fault. I mean, he didn't choose to fall over.
I mean, it's bad luck.
Theresa May's cold.
Yeah.
Theresa May's.
Party conference.
Yeah, exactly. All of those things.
Well, Ed Miliband's bacon sandwich.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of people out there who think that's the only thing Ed Miliband ever did in his life, was to chow down on a bacon sandwich inelegantly.
That's because we live in a visual world,
so we do.
Politics is visual. Yeah. So if that's the career they've chosen,
but the question is, all these people being rude to me, is it actually wrong of us to even be talking about it? Should we rise above it?
Because that's photojournalism, taking that photo, and frankly, because that, I think, was it Stefan Russo who took that photo?
Yeah.
I think so. And you know, Stefan he's a fantastic journalist, and he always, for years now, has been highlighting how increasingly on these trips, Downing Street is overly controlling and do not let an independent photographer attend, so they send their own vanity photographer. And he always makes the point that it's those specific moments that are unflattering to politicians that they want to avoid. And I think it highlights the importance of photojournalism, capturing those moments.
Well, the fact is, it's just what it is. It is how it is, and it's not going to change. I mean, the photographer's lens at an event like that, which is normally a pretty nondescript thing. You know, leaders shake hands, they smile at each other, they exchange some meaningless pleasantries. They're always going to be looking for something out of the ordinary. Ideally, something with a bit of symbolic value to it. And this which in that sense was a gift. And yeah, a politician should probably be aware of these things, because that's the reality, whether it's right or wrong or fair or not. And of course you're right to mention this. And if we didn't have conversations like that, we'd be sitting here in dead silence half the time.
All right, well, I won't resign in shame after all, as is being suggested.
And you can ask all those people, did they also laugh at Rishi Sunak in the rain? Because if they're being so high and mighty, perhaps they should have refrained from that as well.
Well, I think they would have said that was trivial as well, typical of the lobby bubble, the Westminster bubble.
Yeah, you can take it out. You're big enough to handle the odd tsunami of criticism.
Probably annoyed them now. They're probably...
I think you should do a regular Adam reading mean tweets on Pienaar and Friends.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do text in. Say something nice about Adam. If you want to do that, it will make him feel better about things. Send me a text, 87222. Start with the word Times and say something nice about Adam. Now, we're going to wait for the briefing in the White House, which should be at any time now. When it happens, we'll be there, you'll be there. We can hear it together. You'll listen to Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio with Barclays Business Banking. Grow your business. Bank on Barclays.
At Aberdeen Asian.
Grow your business. Bank on Barclays.
So will President Trump decide that America will join in the attack on Iran at Israel's side, even take the lead in that attack, maybe providing those heavy stealth bombers to carry their 30,000-pound bombs to northern Iraq and seek to destroy Iran's nuclear facility deep, in half a mile deep in the mountain of Ford? Or will he not? Or will he keep us guessing, which is also perfectly possible? Yesterday, the answer to the question was, I may not. Now, I think he wants to keep us guessing. Will we learn from Karoline Leavitt what's going on, at least some hint of what's going on in the president's mind? Because he's been meeting his security and intelligence officials in the White House, in the Situation Room, just in the last hour or so. Now, there's a dimension to this, well, so many dimensions to this. I spoke earlier to Simon MacDonald, who's a former head of the diplomatic service at the Foreign Office, about whether the UK would consider the possibility of Iranian reprisals when deciding whether Britain should support America's military effort.
I think that will undoubtedly be weighed by the PM and cabinet. We would make ourselves, in Iranian eyes, a legitimate target, not as big a target as the United States. I mean, it would be ancillary help. I would be amazed if British ordnance or British aeroplanes were to be involved. But American planes starting their operation in Diego Garcia is quite easy to imagine.
Simon MacDonald. I also spoke then to David Hale. He's a former Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs and a former US Special Envoy for Middle East Peace. He said regime change, well, it might come around, but come around on its own.
Yeah, we don't know what's going to come. And that's always one of the dangers about advocating for regime change. It's all well and good to talk about it, but you have no idea what comes after. Except this, before all these events, it looked pretty obvious to me that the succession from Khamenei of real power, I'm not talking about symbolic, was not going to be to another cleric. It was going to be to these sort of faceless, badly dressed men in the IRGC who are now populating much of the parliament. Yes. That's not necessarily going to happen. Now the IRGC has demonstrated that they're utterly useless when it comes to a threat to their country. So the seculars who have no leadership, by definition, moderates are moderate, so they're not very powerful. But it will give them a chance. And as I say, this may not unfold quickly. It may take time, months to happen. We should let it happen. We should not be stirring the pot ourselves. We should be doing what is in our interest, which will happen, by the way, to coincide with what is in the best interest of democracy.
It's David Hale, the former US Special Envoy for the Middle East peace, speaking to me earlier. And I spoke to Ben Hodges, General Ben Hodges, who's a former commanding general of the US Army in Europe. He was deeply uncomfortable with Donald Trump even discussing the possibility of killing Iran's supreme leader.
I think for the President of the United States to talk openly about it is not right. Now, if the Iranian people...
So why is it not right, General?
Well, it's illegal. I mean, you can't legally target the head of another government, no matter how detestable they may be. And, we talk about sovereignty and international rules-based order. Iran, even though it's a government that most of us detest, it's still a sovereign country. And so we need to make sure that we are on solid ground to determine, I'm not talking about asking UN permission to do this, but what is the foundation for what we're wanting to accomplish? What's the outcome? I don't mean just getting rid of the Ayatollah. What comes after that? What are the Saudis going to say, the Qataris, all the other countries in the region, plus our allies, plus the Chinese who depend on Iranian oil? The Russians will have a few. I mean, these are not simple questions.
That's General Ben Hodges sharing his pretty strong views with us just a little earlier. So while we wait for that briefing in the White House West Wing, what do we think? We can only guess, but what do we guess is going to happen? First of all, on the briefing, Anna, come to you first on that. What do you think Karoline Leavitt is going to say to us?
Well, of course, she could clarify what the president has been hinting at. He has suggested that he has already made a decision, and all the reporting coming out of Washington from people with sources within the White House and his team seem to think that he has made a decision, and he's keeping everyone waiting and probably enjoying that moment of being the centre of world attention once again. But equally with Donald Trump, you never know. I mean, there is precedent here. Remember in his first term where he almost struck Iran and the planes were ready to go. And then he changed his mind at the very last minute. Mm. So he's got us all in the palm of his hand, listening, waiting.
He does. Look, I mean, what we can be sure that Karoline Leavitt is not going to come to the stand in a minute or two or whenever she does and say, we're going to bomb. We're going to bomb at 11 o'clock tonight. That's not going to happen. But will there be something to be read between the lines of what she does say? What's your guess, Adam?
Well, you're absolutely right there. I mean, she is the most loyal of mouthpieces to Donald Trump, and she will back him up. And I imagine, as seems to happen almost every time she gives a briefing, she'll attack the media for the speculation which they've been carrying out. And it would be a turn up for the books, although I have to say with the Trump administration, you can never be quite sure if she sort of announces that as of now the bombing raid is commencing. I don't think she's going to do that. I think she may, perhaps almost inadvertently, although she's very sure-footed at these briefings, she may give a hint of where the argument is going on within the Trump administration.
That would be interesting,
because as you highlighted it, there is a big division with a lot of people in MAGA saying, this is just what we said we wouldn't do, get involved in foreign wars. But then there are also traditional conservatives and neoconservatives who are saying, this is the moment, this is an opportunity. Trump appears to have grasped that, and we could go ahead and do it. My reading of him is he is more likely to duck it than not in the end.
Do you think by way of decision not to go with it?
Yeah, because I think he is conflict averse. The only question is whether he thinks, A, this is a golden opportunity, and B, it's gone too far to pull back now because of his, relationship with Israel and, the known detestation of the Iranian regime, which is mutual.
Yeah, which gets us back, I suppose, to the question we've touched on, which is if you're going to destroy Iran's capacity to make a nuclear weapon, you would need to destroy it completely, pretty much completely. You couldn't leave enough of it there to be rebuilt over a period of time, maybe sooner than some people imagine. And to do that, the Fordo base is absolutely crucial. They've done a lot to the Nanance surface base, which has some underground facilities as well. They've hit that and hurt it seriously. The Fordo base is a half a mile deep in rock. And only America, I'm no expert on these things, far from it, but from all I read, only an American heavy bomber, only the kind that America has and only a B-2 bomber can carry, would do that job.
I think it is worth noting in this context that other world powers, the Chinese, the Russians, the Arab nations, have not really been vociferous saying don't do it on this occasion, and that might also be a green light that Donald Trump is picking up on.
Well, and look how quiet Qatar has been, for example. They've played a very important role in the region. They're clearly just watching and waiting.
They're treading the line, though, aren't they? Like the other Gulf states.
Russia is very weakened, which is probably part of the calculation. I think with also there is an element here. I mean, you say you have to destroy it completely. It has already been set back, though, with the bombing so far. The several key people in the nuclear program have been taken out. So it already has been set back. I guess it's almost, I mean, there's been some analysis coming out of Washington which says that Donald Trump was annoyed at first, having essentially been bounced into this because he didn't want this to happen. He wanted the negotiations to continue, but saw effectively almost how well it was carried out, and almost wants to own and have a part of the success. And that is why his own position seems to have shifted in the last couple of days.
Yes, and you refer to, Adam, to the argument going on, I nearly said behind the scenes. I mean, there is an argument behind the scenes among some of Donald Trump's senior people, most senior people. There's another argument very much in the view of everybody inside the MAGA family. People like, Tucker Carlson, the broadcaster, who's been tearing into the idea of this intervention, taking the interpretation of America First. I mean, do not do any more foreign entanglements, having rows with other MAGA people, out loud on air. And that's where you might see Karoline Leavitt drawn in.
Exactly.
She'd rather paper over differences. She may not have a choice.
Well, exactly. She may even take sides because she is now a MAGA figure. I mean, Steve Bannon is another one. But again, in weighing this up, maybe Donald Trump actually feels that this is a moment where he would like to signal that he's a more conventional leader and that he isn't totally enthralled to America First and the MAGAs. I mean, it's a very, very interesting situation. And, as he likes to say, basically he holds the cards on this one.
Well, there's two sides to America First on this. There are some, strongly loyal MAGA people, pro-Trump people. One of them's a podcaster who he had into the White House and briefed on what he was doing there, because the podcasts matter. It's a massive part of that sort of MAGA media ecosystem. So there's no denying the differences that are going on, and they've got to be playing on Donald Trump's mind. And he has, I think, as you say, Adam, in some of his very recent pronouncements, been making the point that I decide what America First means, not you. And that will mean, as it were, just saying, he won't say button it to people like Tucker Carlson, I suppose, because Tucker Carlson won't button it, but he will say there's only one man in charge here.
Yeah, and he likes showing that.
Yeah, fascinating session. And Karoline Leavitt, by the way, is always going to be a fascinating session. I mean, we just had a glimpse of the podium. It's still empty. She'll be there very soon. I don't know about you guys, but I can't wait. I mean, I don't know what you think of Karoline Leavitt, but she does it the way she does it, and she's got the subtlety of a fixed bayonet. I mean, she is considered by some to be a bit of a master of the art. I'm less sure about that, by the way, when you study the work of Karoline Leavitt. She's here, and she's going to be taking questions in a moment. In a moment, we can cross live and pick up what Karoline Leavitt is saying. Sometimes, when it comes to this briefing, there's a lot to cover. She may start on something which is not to do with Iran, maybe something rather more domestic, and we'll just listen all across it. I promise you we'll miss none of this, and we'll hope that effort is going to be repaid by what we hear from the President's press secretary in a moment or two's time. I can tell you the briefing room, well, it's always pretty full. It's full now. The American media are there. There'll be some international media there, and a new development. There are some of the MAGA media ecosystem there. We can cross live now. Let's have a listen to that briefing with Karoline Leavitt.
Are working. According to newly released numbers, last month, Border Patrol saw a 93% decrease of illegal aliens crossing the southwest border between ports of entry from May 2024 under Joe Biden, when they encountered more than 117,000 illegal aliens. And this particular statistic is absolutely astounding. In the month of May, under the Trump administration, 0 illegal aliens were released into our country by Border Patrol. Let me say that again. Not a single illegal alien was released into the interior of the United States of America last month under this administration. Let's contrast that to Joe Biden's failed leadership, where immigration officers were wasting their finite time and resources processing dangerous illegal aliens for release into the United States. President Trump immediately terminated that reckless Biden-era practice that undermined the rule of law, jeopardized public safety and our national security, and diverted critical resources away from stopping deadly drugs and violent criminals from entering our country. That's the reason why not a single illegal alien was released into the interior of the United States in the month of May. And as a result, we now have a border that is reaching unprecedented levels of operational success. The efforts by President Trump to stop the illegal immigrant invasion and secure the border in this short amount of time represent one of the greatest achievements by a presidential administration in the history of our great country. With illegal entries being overwhelmingly halted, the Trump administration is dramatically ramping up efforts to arrest and deport all of the millions of criminal illegal aliens that Joe Biden let into our country over the past 4 years. President Trump has directed all of our ICE officers to do everything in their power to carry out the single largest mass deportation operation in history. Illegal criminals who are hiding in America's largest so-called sanctuary cities will be increasingly targeted for removal. Radical Democrats will no longer be allowed to shelter illegals who threaten public safety as part of their cynical efforts to expand political power, drain the American taxpayer, and artificially lower wages and steal American jobs. ICE officers are courageous heroes, upholding the rule of law and keeping our citizens safe. And they have the full and unwavering support of this president. In economic news, President Trump's pro-growth agenda is delivering for the American worker. Through the first 5 months of the Trump administration, real blue-collar wages are up nearly 2%. It's the strongest growth in nearly 60 years and a stark contrast from the negative wage growth seen during the first 5 months of the Biden administration. America is quickly returning to the successful formula of the first Trump administration: low inflation and rising wages. Once the big, beautiful bill is passed, this positive trend will only accelerate. Senate Republicans are continuing to push this critical legislation forward. The One Big Beautiful Bill will drive growth and supercharge the American economy. The Council of Economic Advisors found that the One Big Beautiful Bill will raise take-home pay by nearly $14,000 for a year for the average family of 4. The CEA also found that the One Big Beautiful Bill will increase wages as much as $11,000 for the average worker in America. The One Big Beautiful Bill expands the child tax credit and makes it permanent for more than 40 million families with children. And the bill will deliver no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and substantial tax cuts for our incredible seniors. Simply put, the One Big Beautiful Bill is a massive win for middle-class Americans. When nearly 80 million Americans sent President Trump back to this White House, they were doing so expecting these popular policies to be enacted. Republicans in Congress have a mandate to deliver, and President Trump demands they send this historic bill to his desk for signature by Independence Day, July 4th. The American people are fully behind President Trump. According to brand new polling from Insider Advantage, a clear 54% majority of Americans approve of the job President Trump is doing. That's because this president is keeping his promises and taking action every day to improve their lives. And passing this bill will help fulfill a number of President Trump's core campaign promises. Now, regarding the ongoing situation in Iran, I know there has been a lot of speculation amongst all of you in the media regarding the president's decision-making and whether or not the United States will be directly involved. In light of that news, I have a message directly from the president, and I quote, "Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks." That's a quote directly from the president for all of you today. So we'll kick it off for questions here in our new media seat. We have Eli Lake from the Free Press. Eli, go ahead.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
The Free Press. The decision to extend the, I guess, delay in enforcing the TikTok ban.
Sure.
Can you talk about how the White House understands its constitutional authority in light of the Supreme Court's decision in January that said that the president had to enforce the ban?
Sure. Well, as all of you know, because the president put it out on his Truth Social today, he did sign an executive order to extend the TikTok ban for 90 days. So in the effort to make a deal, and the White House counsel and the Department of Justice have reviewed this executive order, and I can get it for you. I think it's on our website by now. If it's not, my team will now put it up immediately. And you can read the language in that executive order. And the White House counsel's office and the Department of Justice strongly believe in the legal rationale for this executive order. They wouldn't have the president's pen hit it if they didn't. And the political reasoning for this, of course, is because the president made a promise to keep TikTok on. There are 100 million Americans who use this app. It's widely popular. He also wants to protect Americans' data and privacy concerns on this app, and he believes we can do both things at the same time. So he's making an extension so we can get this deal done.
Can I get a follow-up?
Sure.
A few weeks ago, Tucker Carlson reported on a meeting between the president, Mark Levin, and others at the White House. Is there a leak investigation, and can you say who else was in that meeting?
I'm not aware of a leak investigation at this time. I, for one, do not reveal details about the president's private meetings without his permission to do so. But certainly the president does not like when people leak. He takes that very seriously. This entire administration takes that seriously, and that's why you've seen at agencies some of the cabinet secretaries have been given the authority by the president to let go of staff who are engaged in such leaks, especially those that risk American national security. Sure, go ahead.
Caroline, thank you. So Rhino warmonger Lindsey Graham, he recently called on the U.S. to go all in.
That's quite the lead to a question.
Right. What's your message to everyday Trump supporters? Not the Tucker Carlsons or other big names, but everyday Trump supporters, grassroots who voted for President Trump to stop the wars, rejected this in the primary, going into another war with voting against Nikki Haley, and they want to see non-U.S. involvement in this war. What's your message?
Trust in President Trump. President Trump has incredible instincts, and President Trump kept America and the world safe in his first term as president in implementing a peace through strength foreign policy agenda. And with respect to Iran, nobody should be surprised by the president's position that Iran absolutely cannot obtain a nuclear weapon. He's been unequivocally clear about this for decades, not just as president, not just as a presidential candidate, but also as a private citizen. In fact, I have some quotes for you. In 2011, President Trump said, America's primary goal with Iran must be to destroy its nuclear ambitions. We cannot allow this radical regime to acquire a nuclear weapon that they will either use or hand off to terrorists. In 2015, the president said the problem is that Iran poses an existential threat to Israel, our Middle Eastern allies, and the United States. And of course, the president has repeated that in his first term as president and his second term as president as well. That's why he was adamantly opposed to the disastrous Iranian nuclear agreement that was implemented by President Obama. And it's why he has given great latitude and given a lot of effort to achieving a diplomatic solution. But he's been very clear. Iran went for 60 days when he gave them that 60-day warning without coming to the table. On day 61, Israel took action against Iran. And as I just told you from the president directly, he will make a decision within 2 weeks.
A follow-up?
Sure. Go ahead, Natalie.
Thanks, Caroline. Can you confirm whether Steve Witkoff has been in touch with the Iranian foreign minister? And does Witkoff plan to go to Geneva tomorrow for talks?
I am not tracking that on Mr. Witkoff's travel schedule, but I can certainly check in with him to be sure. As for correspondence between the United States and the Iranians, I can confirm that correspondence has continued. As you know, we were engaged with 6 rounds of negotiations with them in both indirect and direct ways.
Thanks, Kelly. Just to clarify the president's statement just now, when he says that he'll make a decision in the next 2 weeks, is he saying that if Iran does not come back to the negotiating table within the next 2 weeks, that the president will strike?
The president is saying that he will make a decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks. It's very clear and direct.
And is he seeing any signs of progress? He obviously is holding out hope for negotiations, but is he seeing any inklings of progress that give him that hope that talks are still possible?
Well, that's why he said in the statement that I just read for all of you, based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place, with Iran in the near future, he will make that decision within the next 2 weeks.
What makes him think there's still a substantial chance, is my question.
I'm not going to get into the reasoning and the rationale. The president believes that, but that's his position, and he will make a decision within the next 2 weeks.
Karoline.
Sure.
Thanks, Karoline. President Trump has said previously in regard to Russia, he's used this phrase about 2 weeks several times in terms of like, we expect like a 2-week deadline and then you give another 2-week deadline. How can we be sure that he's going to stick to this one on making a decision on Iran?
Well, in those deadlines, as you've seen in respect to Russia-Ukraine, might I add, these are two very different, complicated global conflicts, as you know, that the president inherited from our previous incompetent president in the weakness of the previous administration. And the president has spent a tremendous amount of time and effort cleaning up these crises that were caused by the last administration's just complete dereliction of duty on the world stage and American weakness. Now we have American strength again. With respect to Russia and Ukraine, because of that American strength and the president's leadership, we have seen these two sides engage in direct negotiations. And the last time the president said 2 weeks, you saw Russia and Ukraine have direct negotiations for the first time in years. And so the president is always interested in a diplomatic solution to the problems and the global conflicts in this world. Again, he is a peacemaker in chief. He is the peace through strength president. And so if there's a chance for diplomacy, the president's always going to grab it. But he's not afraid to use strength as well, I will add. Francesca.
Thanks, Caroline. What exactly would a deal with Iran need to entail?
No enrichment of a uranium, and it would absolutely not. Iran is not absolutely not able to achieve a nuclear weapon. The president has been very clear about that. And by the way, the deal that Special Envoy Witkoff proposed to the Iranians was both realistic and acceptable within its terms. And that's why the president is sent that deal to them.
To follow up on what you told Natalie, are the talks that the United States is currently having with Iran direct, or are those through intermediaries? And if so, which countries are acting as the intermediary right now?
Out of respect for the ongoing discussions and negotiations, I am not going to get into the details of them. We've provided you confirmation for now. Go ahead. Sure, and then behind you too.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, on the topic of negotiations and talks, does the president have any hopes or specific expectations for the talks tomorrow between European foreign secretaries and their Iranian counterpart?
Well, certainly the entire world is on the president's side when it comes to the fact that Iran cannot obtain a nuclear weapon. This is something that pretty much all of humanity, except for the Iranian terrorist regime themselves, agree upon. And so the president expects that Europe will deliver that message directly to the Iranians.
Why does President Trump believe that this 90-day extension on TikTok will provide more runway perhaps than the previous extensions that haven't led to a divestment deal?
Because it's more time to make a good deal. Simple question. Dasha?
Thank you so much. I know things are going day by day right now. The president wants maximum optionality. Is the possibility of the U.S. getting involved in regime change in Iran at all on the table at this point? And then I have one on
Sure. The president's top priority right now is ensuring that Iran cannot obtain a nuclear weapon and providing peace and stability in the Middle East.
And on Medicaid, Caroline,
Sure.
the Senate put forward Medicaid provisions, particularly a lower cap on state provider taxes that hospitals have said would lead to mass closures, particularly in rural communities. Is the president willing to sign a bill that includes those provisions that Republican senators like Josh Hawley say will lead to hospital closures?
Out of respect for the ongoing discussions that the White House is very much actively involved in with our friends in the United States Senate, I won't comment on that specific provision. Look, the bill hasn't been sent to the president's desk yet. There's more room for change. The president, for one, I will reiterate, has been very clear on his priorities with respect to Medicaid. He wants to see waste, fraud, and abuse ridden from the system to protect it for tax-paying citizens who deserve those much-needed benefits. He wants to prioritize the sick, the needy, the poor in this country who deserve those benefits, not the 1.4 million illegal aliens who are receiving them. And he wants to make sure this one big beautiful bill kicks those illegal aliens off of this program to preserve it and protect it and strengthen it for the American people. And the president has been very clear in that message to his friends in the Senate. Jackie.
Thank you, Caroline.
Sure.
Logistically, if the Iranians are getting to Geneva, does that mean they've found a way to get to the White House?
I am not going to get into hypotheticals, but as you heard from the president yesterday, they have expressed interest in doing so.
There's a lot of pressure on the president to come to the aid of Israel. There's a lot of pressure on him to finish the job with force. How is he balancing the concern that if he doesn't choose to do that, that it would send a message to Xi Jinping about the U.S. commitment to Taiwan?
Well, the president enjoys a very respectful and cordial relationship with China's president. He has long maintained that, even in his first term. And China and the United States share many strategic interests, both in terms of economics and also, of course, global affairs and foreign policy.
Okay, we're going to put away from that live briefing there at the briefing room in the West Wing of the White House. As the president's press secretary, Karoline Leavitt, pretty much now resorting to a full-on Stonewall mode. All questions now being treated with a pretty much dead bat. Whatever she had to say over the last few minutes, it was always going to be interesting, and it was interesting, although in its way somewhat Delphic. And at first listening to Karoline Leavitt there, the tone of the thing was of President Trump having decided to give peace a bit more time, give it a bit of a chance. Then you listen more closely, and options are left open. She spoke about the president taking the view there's a substantial chance of talks maybe taking place, or not. Which basically sounds like a contradiction, and rather was. He's convinced he doesn't know what might happen, but either way, he's going to hang on. But for how long? Well, within 2 weeks, which could be 2 weeks, it could be hours. We simply don't know the answer to all of that. So keeping us guessing, the presumption is we're heading closer and closer towards an American intervention directly into this conflict, but we wait to see what happens and when. Get the thoughts in a moment of Anna Mikhailova, of Adam Boulton. We're going to be talking to, in just a moment, to Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, who's a former US National Security Council member, for his reaction, and Harriet Alexander is with us too, stateside. You're listening to Pienaar and Friends here on Times Radio with Barclays Business Banking. Find out how Barclays can help move your business forward. Search Barclays Bank. Time. With me on Pienaar and Friends, Anna Mikhailova, Adam Boulton, Harriet Alexander stateside, and we're going to talk in a minute to Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, a former US National Security Council member. Harriet, listening to that statement from Karoline Leavitt, what did you make of it?
Well, it does sound, doesn't it, like the peace side has won out for now. This idea of giving 2 more weeks for diplomacy to take effect, that would certainly suggest that he still has faith that a diplomatic agreement can be reached. I mean, he was pressed on that. Karoline Leavitt was pressed on that, and she wouldn't go into detail. I would have asked her actually who Trump spoke to this morning, because we're really aware that Trump generally tends to act on the information that was most recently whispered in his ear. So, this morning, was he talking to the Qataris, the Saudis, who we know are very concerned about the potential fallout from Trump and the US supporting, getting very involved in the situation in Iran? Or was he talking to Netanyahu this morning? I mean, if he was talking to Netanyahu, that would be fascinating, wouldn't it? That he seems to have drawn back despite that conversation. So I'd be really interested to know who he was talking to, because yes, as now it's pretty vague, and you can expect a lot of goading of Trump online because he really likes this 2-week deadline. I mean, it was a 60-day timeline, then 2 weeks, etc. So you're going to see a lot of this slogan TACO, which is Trump always chickens out, and he doesn't like that slogan.
Yeah, I mean, the time space given was within 2 weeks. Could be 2 weeks, could be 2 hours. Let's get the thoughts of Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, the former US National Security Council member, who is on the line. Admiral, welcome to the programme.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
What did you make of it, Admiral?
Yeah, it's disappointing. And here's why it's disappointing. Not because we have to do a strike. The problem is I do think this idea of 2 weeks is what he uses with Zelensky and Putin. He's always giving Putin 2 weeks. I mean, at some point you have to understand authoritarians don't take those 2 weeks to do like soulful reflection and change their habits, right? The authoritarians use those 2 weeks to better position themselves. The problem in this case is whereas when you give 2 weeks to Russia, Zelensky, it's harder for Ukraine to impose cost on Russia, not impossible. Israel can impose cost on Iran, and 2 more weeks of Israel imposing cost is working around the edges of all the supply chain of their ballistic missile and nuclear programs. So I think there's going to still be a lot of business going on in Iran being executed by the Israeli Air Force, who has air superiority. Yeah. So that's a bit of a difference. But I'm disappointed in the sense that, like, what's 2 weeks mean? What's different? Either you have a deal with them that you believe is acceptable and you can convince the Israelis it's acceptable, or you don't. And then you do the one thing the Israelis can't do. This would end in 3 or 4 days if the United States did a 2-night campaign against the nuclear facilities that require massive ordnance penetrators.
Yes. I mean, Admiral, you're a military authority in a way that I simply am not. But it is said by other experts in this field that even 30,000-pound bombs dropped by a B-2 at altitude onto a deeply, deeply buried facility cannot be sure of destroying that facility. There are contrary views. I read another expert saying it would collapse the mountain. But what do you say to those who say you can't be sure of destroying it, and to achieve success, you would need to destroy it completely?
Sure. So the first thing I say is I'm 100% sure no 30,000-pound bomb has ever worked when not launched, right? In other words, if you don't use it, I guarantee you won't get this result. I think this is the best way to get to an end to this. Look, from the U.S. military's point of view, I think they're almost ready to do this because the drain that we've had on our military readiness over 20 years of cycling forces up and down for this Iran thing. We're back to 2 carrier strike groups, 5, 6, 7 Air Force squadrons, tons of air defense units spread throughout the Middle East. This is hurting us. So, look, I think we're at the point where let's find out what the massive ordnance penetrator can do. It was built for this mission. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I don't think we're in a significantly worse position than we were than the morning before we did the strike. But I do happen to think it'll work. But I do acknowledge that we won't know till we do it.
Okay, I mean, I can tell you, Admiral, that we've been crowding around the screens here watching that briefing. Here with me in the London studio, Adam Boulton and Anna Mikhailova, and our colleague Harriet Alexander there with you in the States. Adam,
I just wonder whether actually between them, Karoline Leavitt and the president haven't rather wrote themselves into having to do it, and I say that simply because the ultimatum which she gave, no enrichment of uranium and no nuclear bomb, is something which, so long as it's there, the Iranian regime is simply not going to accept. I mean, that's why this has been going on for so long. So if you put that up against the TACO allegations and the 2-week deadline, it seems to me that this is Trump, giving a last chance, not really too pleased that the European is involved in negotiations, but accepting that they are there. But he's going to, on the basis of this briefing, they are going to hit a brick wall. And so that makes it more likely it's going to happen, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that expectation is going to grow. What are you thinking, Anna?
Well, it certainly stood out to me. On the one hand, I think it's correct to look at it as they've given themselves more breathing space with the 2 weeks. I mean, until now, even this morning, we were expecting something this weekend, perhaps, if it were to happen. Could still happen, but I think that up to 2 weeks does give it a bit more space for them to think and talk it through. But I do think her emphasis on his consistent position over Iran's nuclear program, I think that stood out to me, because she made a point of saying that, and she essentially gave both, whichever decision he makes, she gave him the justification for both. The arguments she will then use to defend him have been set out today, whichever way he sides.
And also the presentation, where we heard a lot about zero immigration across the legal immigration across the border, about the economy putting money in people's pockets. I mean, whether or not that's true, that was clearly designed to soften up his base to whatever he does.
Yes.
And we did hear those repeated statements, not only about what he said about Iran in the past, but how he is someone who is ready to take strong action, to quote. So, I think we did see a sort of sensitivity to the criticism he's come under, and it seemed to point in the direction that, yes, he'd give negotiations one last chance, but after that, he will go ahead.
Yeah. Harriet, what's the big question on your mind?
I want to know what Stephen Witkoff is going to be doing now. He's the person who is Trump's negotiator on this. Karoline Leavitt was asked whether he's going to be going to Geneva to take part in these discussions. She said she didn't know, and she would get back to us on that. He has reportedly, according to Reuters, been suggesting that the Iranians would transfer their nuclear enrichment facilities outside of the country. So that would be a way that Iran could have a nuclear power program, but it wouldn't be enriched to a level where a bomb could be created. The Iranians have reportedly dismissed that out of hand and said it's a non-starter. I think if they carry on with that position, then perhaps it does mean that this bunker busting bomb will be used ultimately. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what he does for the next few days.
Right, Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, you're keen to come back.
Yeah. So two thoughts. One, if Benjamin Netanyahu said up to 2 weeks, I'd probably be bracing myself for an attack in about an hour. So everyone's up to 2 weeks is a little bit different, but I tend to agree with your team that they're going to give him the full 2 weeks. And as far as Steve Witkoff, the best thing that could happen is that he goes back to selling real estate, because he hasn't been good for Ukraine, and he hasn't been good, in my mind, for this Israel-Iran problem. He is not solving the problem we have with this axis of aggressors, because in the end, they can't be negotiated into these softer positions. And I agree completely that Iran doesn't run this program so that it can be operated for peaceful purposes in another country for the development of a civilian nuclear power program in Iran. We all know that's not what the basis of this is. So if that's the basis for negotiation, it's not going to go anywhere.
Yes, and as a former military commander, I suppose it is conceivable that even if the president has, as has some have reported, resolved on the idea in principle of joining the attack on Iran, that will also need to take into account contingencies of the reaction of Iran. And there are American assets in the region. There are bases in the region. There are other potential targets that America would wish to protect. Could the time also be used, Admiral, to get in place the strongest possible defences against an Iranian missile attack, or something from what's left of those Iranian proxies?
No, I agree. That's a great point. Two thoughts on that. One, we had just initiated a mandatory evacuation of dependents from Bahrain and other bases in the Middle East. So this can now finish. We're bringing in air defense assets to double down on what we have there and getting our forces probably consolidated underneath them. Because you're absolutely right. A likely response from Iran, a foolish response. I mean, if I were them, I would take the hit on Fordow and be thankful that's the only thing the U.S. Air Force is doing. Because as much as the Israelis can generate several hundred attack points a night, if you invite the U.S. Air Force to this and the U.S. Navy to this campaign, it would be triple or quadruple, and that will happen if Iran strikes out at U.S. forces. So I can't guarantee that would happen, but you're absolutely right. We'll spend 2 weeks trying to minimize the risk and consequences of Iran striking out at U.S. forces in the Middle East.
All right, Admiral, I'll have to leave you there. Thank you so much for your contribution. Adam and Anna, great to talk to you as always. Let's do it again same time next week. And Harriet, we will do it again, I'm sure, before too very long. Thanks to all of you for listening. Our producers today, Angus Mitchell and Emily Leahy. Our technical operator, Isaac Marley. And coming up next, picking up and running with the bass and Kate Borsay. This is Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
Thanks, John. Have a great weekend.